On a quiet April morning in 1775, the sound of musket fire shattered the calm of the Massachusetts countryside. Farmers dropped their tools, church bells rang an alarm, and ordinary men reached for weapons they had hoped never to use. What happened that day did not feel like the birth of a new nation. It felt like confusion, fear, and irreversible change. Yet those first shots marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, also known as the American War of Independence, a conflict that would transform 13 British colonies into an independent republic and alter the course of global history. The war did not erupt suddenly. Its origins lay in the long and uneasy relationship between Great Britain and its North American colonies. For much of the 18th century, Britain allowed the colonies a large degree of self-government, focusing mainly on trade and imperial defence. This balance began to collapse after Britain emerged victorious but deeply in debt following the 7 Years' War. Determined to recover financially and assert tighter control, Parliament passed a series of new taxes and regulations affecting the colonies. Measures such as the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts were deeply unpopular, not only because they imposed financial burdens, but because they were enforced without colonial representation in Parliament. To many colonists, this violated their constitutional rights. Resistance grew steadily. Merchants organised boycotts of British goods, political writers attacked imperial policies, and crowds sometimes turned violent against tax collectors and royal officials. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1770 with the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 civilians. Though the event was used as propaganda by colonial leaders, it reflected the growing hostility between soldiers and citizens. 3 years later, the Boston Tea Party demonstrated how far colonial resistance had gone. In response, Parliament enacted the Coercive Acts, intended to punish Massachusetts and reassert authority. Instead, they unified colonial opposition and convinced many that British rule threatened their liberties. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies met at the First Continental Congress to coordinate resistance. While some still hoped for reconciliation, others believed independence was inevitable. The Congress organised economic pressure against Britain and prepared for the possibility of armed conflict. That conflict arrived in April 1775 when British troops marched toward Lexington and Concord. Local militias confronted them, and the exchange of fire, brief but deadly, set the colonies and Britain on the path to war. The British retreat to Boston under constant harassment proved that colonial forces were willing and able to fight. The fighting around Boston escalated quickly. Colonial militia forces surrounded the city, while British commanders struggled to maintain control. In June 1775, colonial troops clashed with British forces at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Although the British ultimately took the ground, they suffered heavy casualties, demonstrating that the colonial militias could stand against professional soldiers. The psychological impact was enormous. For the colonies, it was proof that resistance was not hopeless. For Britain, it was a warning that suppressing the rebellion would be costly and prolonged. As war spread, the Second Continental Congress assumed greater authority. It created a Continental Army and appointed George Washington as Commander-in-Chief. Washington faced overwhelming challenges from the start. His army was poorly trained, inadequately supplied, and often undisciplined. Soldiers came and went as enlistments expired, and shortages of food, clothing, and ammunition were constant. Yet Washington's leadership emphasized endurance rather than decisive victory. He understood that the colonies did not need to defeat Britain outright. They needed only to survive long enough to make the war politically and economically unsustainable for the empire. While military preparations continued, the ideological meaning of the conflict deepened. Early in the war, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation. That sentiment faded rapidly. In January 1776, the pamphlet Common Sense argued that independence was both necessary and inevitable, attacking monarchy itself and presenting self-government as a natural right. Its widespread circulation transformed public opinion. By July, the Continental Congress adopted a formal declaration announcing that the colonies were free and independent states. The declaration asserted that governments derived their power from the consent of the governed, and that people had the right to overthrow tyranny. These ideas gave moral purpose to the war and redefined it as a revolutionary struggle rather than a civil conflict within the empire. The military situation, however, remained grim. British forces captured New York in 1776, delivering a series of crushing defeats to Washington's army. The Continental Army retreated across New Jersey, its numbers shrinking and morale collapsing. In December, Washington launched a daring surprise attack on British-hired German troops at Trenton, followed by another victory at Princeton. Though small in scale, These victories revived colonial confidence and demonstrated Washington's ability to adapt and survive under pressure. The war soon expanded beyond the original centers of rebellion. Fighting spread to the middle colonies and the south, turning the conflict into a civil war in many regions. Loyalists, colonists who supported Britain, fought alongside British troops, while patriots targeted loyalist property and influence. Families and communities were divided, and violence often extended beyond the battlefield. Native American nations were also drawn into the conflict, forced to choose sides in hopes of protecting their lands. Most sided with Britain, viewing the expanding colonies as a greater threat, a decision that would have devastating consequences after the war. One of the darkest periods of the conflict occurred during the winter encampment at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778. Disease, hunger, and exposure killed thousands of soldiers, yet the army endured. Training under European officers improved discipline and effectiveness, transforming the Continental Army into a more professional force. This survival, rather than victory, became a symbol of the Revolution's resilience. A turning point came in late 1777 with the American victory at Saratoga. British General John Burgoyne's army was surrounded and forced to surrender, marking the first time a major British force had been defeated in the war. The victory had immense international significance. It convinced France that the American cause was viable. French support, secured through diplomatic efforts by figures such as Benjamin Franklin, brought money, supplies, soldiers, and, most importantly, naval power. The war became a global conflict, with fighting extending to the Caribbean, Europe, and the Indian Ocean. British strategy shifted toward the southern colonies, where they believed loyalist support was stronger. Early successes followed, including the capture of Savannah and Charleston. However, brutal fighting and harsh British tactics turned many civilians against the Crown. American commanders adapted to southern conditions, using mobility and local knowledge to wear down British forces. Guerrilla warfare, combined with traditional battles, made the southern campaign costly and unpredictable. By 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to the Virginia coast, establishing a fortified position at Yorktown. There, events aligned decisively in favor of the Americans. French naval forces blocked British reinforcements by sea, while American and French armies surrounded Cornwallis by land. After weeks of bombardment, the British position became untenable. Cornwallis surrendered in October 1781, effectively ending major fighting in North America. Although the war continued at a lower intensity, Yorktown shattered British political support for continuing the conflict. Negotiations began, and in 1783, Great Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. The Treaty of Paris marked the end of a war that had lasted 8 years and claimed tens of thousands of lives. The consequences of the American Revolutionary War were profound and far-reaching. It established a republic founded on principles of liberty, representative government, and the rule of law. These ideals inspired political movements across Europe and Latin America, challenging monarchies and empires worldwide. At the same time, the revolution exposed deep contradictions. Slavery remained entrenched, Native American lands were increasingly seized, and women were largely excluded from political rights. The promise of equality was real but incomplete, setting the stage for future struggles. The American Revolutionary War was not simply a military contest between colonies and empire. It was a social and ideological upheaval that forced people to confront questions of authority, loyalty, and human rights. Ordinary individuals, soldiers, farmers, women managing households, enslaved people seeking freedom, shaped the outcome as much as generals and politicians. The war's true legacy lies in its challenge to the idea that power was fixed and unquestionable. It proved that a determined population, united by shared ideals and sustained through hardship, could reshape its destiny. From the first uncertain shots in Massachusetts to the final signatures on a peace treaty, the American War of Independence was marked by sacrifice, resilience, and transformation. It did not create a perfect nation, but it created a new political reality, one that continues to influence ideas of freedom and self-government to this day.